Hello there, and welcome to Ghostly Trails, where tonight we're exploring the haunted hotspots of Wiltshire. Between the villages of All Cannings and Alton Priors is a striking group of hills, one of which, Milk Hill, is the highest point in Wiltshire. Over thousands of years, shepherds, tradesmen and drovers alike would have walked this ancient ridgeway, and they've handed down some pretty strange stories of spooky encounters. One spot amongst these hills is known as Adam's Grave, another of this area's spectacular longbarrows. Approximately 60 metres long and 6 metres high, it seems it was designed to stand out high up on the hill. At the southeast end, two sarsen stones known as Old Adam and Little Eve mark what would have been the entrance, sadly no longer open. Legend has it that this is the final resting place of a decidedly grumpy giant, and if you run around the barrow 7 times, he will awake and wreak havoc in the neighbourhood. I've heard many excuses for not taking exercise, but this one is a doozy. But there is a ghostly encounter that took place here. One account from the mid-1960s tells of a Miss Coburn who was walking back from the barrow to the lay-by at the top of the hill. About 50 yards from the barrow, she suddenly felt a dramatic change in the atmosphere of the place. The weather had suddenly become cold and cloudy, and no other soul was to be seen anywhere. The solitude of the place began to unnerve her. The whole area was deserted, except for a peaceful flock of grazing sheep. Obliged to continue her journey, she walked on only to hear the distinct sound of horses' hooves growing louder and louder until it sounded as if an entire army might appear along the ridgeway at any moment. Alas, no horses were to be seen anywhere, and as she walked on, the quieter the sound of the clattering hooves became, eventually fading into silence. There seems to be no obvious explanation for the sound, although this area was the site of 2 battles, both of which are recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. In AD 592, the battle at Wodensborough took place, in which the King Ceolin of Anglo-Saxon Wessex was driven out, by whom we're uncertain, and another battle in the year 715 between 2 armies of equally uncertain origin. Looking at the topography of the area, one can easily see why it might be a strategically important location. It has been known for horses to bolt in terror when near Adam's Grave, and a number of shadowy figures have been spotted making their way along the ridgeway to Knapp Hill. Just south of Devizes, there's a place called Folly Wood, near the boundaries of Eastcote and Easterton. It is so named because of a house that once stood there, north of the wood, called Castle House. It was built by the Wroughton family of Urchfont in around 1730. They were a prominent family in Wiltshire, and in 1758 Seymour Wroughton inherited the house and renovated the place, sparing no expense. Servants' quarters, cellars, stables, gardens and bedrooms were all added, as well as a gazebo which he placed high up on a hill called Maggot's Castle. This gazebo is and has always been known as Wroughton's Folly. By all accounts, he was the black sheep of the family, living like a recluse in his luxurious house above the woods. Rumours began to circulate in the nearby villages about girls who had ventured down to Maggot's Castle, never to return. suspicion settled on Wroughton, but no real evidence was ever found. It is said, however, that the locals were terrified of going anywhere near the place and would even refuse to work there. Whatever the girls' fate actually was, we're told that to this day their ghosts roam Folly Wood, where the house once stood. Wroughton came to a sticky end when the sister of one of the girls who had gone missing placed a large rock in the road near the driveway to his house. It was New Year's Eve, 1798, and Wroughton was more than a little plastered when he drove home in his pony and trap. As he went to turn into his drive, his wheel caught the rock and overturned. The trap disintegrated, trapping Wroughton in its wreckage, and the pony dragged the tangled mess all the way down the drive to the stables. On its arrival, Wroughton was very dead indeed. It is said that if you do decide to spend your New Year's Eve in darkest Wiltshire, amongst the looming, gnarly trees of Folly Wood, you might well encounter Wroughton's ghostly trap, rushing along the track, as it did in 1789. They say, if you look into his eyes as he passes, you will surely go mad. Local children are still warned to stay away from these woods for fear of encountering wild Seymour Wroughton. After his death, the house was auctioned off, but it was never lived in again. It fell into disrepair, and now there is almost nothing left to show of its existence but a couple of fish ponds, largely obscured by trees. Even today, locals are reluctant to venture into Folly Wood. Along the northern edge of Salisbury Plain, we find Urchfont Manor, built by Sir William Pynsent late in the 17th century on the site of an earlier house, and surrounded by the village of the same name. The fireplace and several other features from the old house survived and were incorporated into the new building. On his death in 1719, William Pynsent's estate passed to his son, also William, and when he died without children in 1765, ownership of the house went on a complicated journey through the Prime Minister of the day, William Pitt, to the Duke of Queensberry and others, eventually ending up in the hands of a lawyer, Hamilton Rivers Pollock. Respected in the community and considered formidable amongst his peers, on the surface all seemed well with Hamilton. However, unknown even to many of his friends, he was prone to bouts of extreme depression. On the 11th of June, 1940, during one of his deepest lows, he gave all his staff the day off, took a pistol and shot his wife dead whilst she was sitting at her piano, before turning the weapon upon himself. This tragedy shook the community, and naturally a great deal of sympathy was felt for their children. In 1941, their son Martin leased the house to the London County Council, and 4 years later it was sold to Wiltshire County Council. They used it as a residential centre for adult education. In 2012, it was sold as a private residence. Legend has it that the ghost of Mrs. Rivers Pollock, dressed all in black, roams the manor. One Christmas, whilst the house was still an educational establishment, the staff reported that when they had just finished cleaning the manor's many bedrooms and were preparing to close up at the end of the college term, they gathered in the dining room for a celebratory Christmas drink. As they were toasting the beginning of the holiday, two of them noticed a dark, shadowy figure pass the entrance to the dining room, coming from the kitchen. Naturally concerned as to who was wandering round the house, they went to investigate, but they weren't able to find anyone. Ever since then, the kitchen has been haunted by this shadowy figure, most commonly seen out of the corner of the eye. It's sometimes accompanied by the strong feeling of being watched. One guest staying at the manor remembers waking up one night feeling very cold to find his bed covers bunched up at the foot of the bed. Assuming he'd kicked them off in his sleep, he pulled the covers back over himself, only for them to be snatched away again. He spent a cold and restless night. In the grounds, Fiddler's Cottage, built in the 18th century, was used in the early 20th century as the village police station. There were many reports of footsteps pacing across the upper floors of the cottage, despite there being nobody upstairs. Others reported a strong sense of someone on the stairs watching them intently. Now we arrive at the ancient city of Salisbury. Its impressive cathedral is one of the leading examples of early English Gothic architecture, with its main body built over 38 years, from 1220 to 1258. It replaced an earlier cathedral just north of Salisbury at Old Sarum. The spire was first built in 1320 and later heightened to 404 foot, that's 123 metres, and it is now the tallest church spire in the United Kingdom. The cathedral contains a clock which is among the oldest working clocks in the world, and it also houses one of the 4 surviving original copies of Magna Carta. There is a tradition based on an eerie tale of the death of a bishop somewhere abroad in 1414. On that occasion, a great flock of huge white birds flew out of the sky and settled on the roof of the building where his body was lying in state. They made a loud clamour throughout the night. Nobody could recall ever having heard or seen anything like it before. From that time on, the legend grew that mysterious white birds will be seen around the cathedral whenever the bishop is about to die. The most famous and best documented sighting occurred in 1885. A certain Miss Moberly was walking across the cathedral close when she saw the huge birds wheeling above her. Not knowing of the legend, she pointed out the strange birds to a nearby workman, who told her of the old story. Miss Moberly was the daughter of the current bishop, and he was grievously ill. The poor girl hurried home, and sure enough, her father died later that day. Within the cathedral, a spooky apparition has been seen above the tomb of Charles, 8th Baron Starton. In 1575, this 16th century aristocrat was convicted of murdering 2 men and hanged. The noose they used was placed on his tomb, presumably pour encourager les autres. It was taken away years later because it was considered in bad taste. But the shadowy form of the noose has since been seen several times suspended above the tomb. The pub in Minster Street, called the Haunch of Venison, is said to be the most haunted in the town. Not surprising, perhaps, considering it was built in 1320. One of Salisbury's oldest hostelries, in its early days the landlord ran an interesting establishment with a brothel in the cellar, which had a secret tunnel leading to the local church, an ideal escape route for those wishing to conceal their identities or their proclivities. The ghost story here is that during the 1820s, a man passing through Salisbury en route to Southampton stopped to lodge for the night at the Haunch of Venison, by then well known as an English chop house, which generally meant a place with decent food. Inside, the locals ate, drank, gambled as they would on any normal evening, until he came in when the atmosphere turned icy. He walked up to the bar, ordered a tankard of ale, and after downing it in one, tossed a gold coin to the potboy and proclaimed, "Ale for everyone." Tensions in the room were eased, and he was invited to take part in a card game. It seemed luck was with him, for he won hand after hand, to the point where the locals grew suspicious. One of the card players, a local butcher by trade, produced a blade and severed the man's hand from his arm. The stranger fled the pub, clutching his bloody stump, and the locals' attention turned to the severed hand, lying motionless on the floor. In its grip were 5 bloody aces. It sounds a far-fetched story, but just over a century ago, during renovations to the pub, a mummified hand was discovered walled up behind a fireplace upstairs, holding 19th century playing cards. For many years, this hand was kept in a locked display cabinet. Pour encourager les autres, presumably. But curiously, one day it went missing. There was quite a media storm at the time, but it's never been recovered. To this day, the pub is thought to be haunted by the ghost of the one-handed card player. Visitors have reported feeling cold spots in some parts of the pub, and staff have heard doors slamming when the building is thought to be empty. Much of this ghostly activity is accompanied by the smell of damp earth and wet leaves. A woman in a white shawl has also been seen. It's thought to be the ghost of a woman who, early in the 19th century, sent her son to the pub to buy a jug of beer, but he never returned. Whether he was robbed on the way or on the way back, history doesn't relate. Whatever it was, he never made it home, and the figure of the woman in a shawl has been seen climbing the stairs of the pub ever since, searching for her lost son. The Debenhams department store in Salisbury is rumoured to be haunted by the second Duke of Buckingham, Henry Stafford. Accused of treason against King Richard III on the 2nd of November 1483, he was beheaded in the Market Square, the place where Debenhams now stands. Before Debenhams occupied the store, it was the site of the Saracen's Head Inn, and before that the Blue Boar Inn. Buckingham spent the last hours of his life locked in an attic room immediately above the Blue Boar at the rear of the store, and his ghost has wandered the building ever since. In 1838, a report in the Salopian Journal talked of the unearthing of a skeleton missing its head and right arm. Locals were quick to claim that these remains must be those of Henry Stafford. However, an entry in the Chronicles of the Grey Friars Monastery of London cast doubt on this, stating the Duke of Buckingham was beheaded at Salisbury and buried at Grey Friars. This is rather more likely, because Richard III was known to behave honourably towards those he executed, and to provide them with a proper burial. What a considerate monarch. Whatever the location of Buckingham's grave, his ghost is supposed to have been seen around the store, sometimes making a strange hissing noise. A telephone engineer, when working alone in the attic, felt a cold hand grasp his shoulders. When he turned round, there was nobody to be seen. Unsurprisingly, he fled, and someone else had to retrieve his tools for him. So well known is the Duke of Buckingham's ghost that he is nicknamed the Duke of Debenhams. Also in the building, the apparition of a small Victorian girl has been seen, curtsying to visitors and then vanishing into thin air. Another ghostly location in Salisbury is the Cross Keys Shopping Centre. In one of their buildings, strange, dragging noises, white mist and ghostly figures at the windows have all been reported. The owners have spotted the ghost of a former cleaner called Evan, as well as that of someone called Owen, who attended the horses in the stables in years gone by. These days, the building houses a very successful ghost-themed escape room. Anyone fancy being frightened out of their wits? There are many other haunted locations in Salisbury to enjoy. Montpesson House, the beautiful Georgian house that featured in the film of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and is now owned by the National Trust, is famous for a demon story told by former owner Dennis Martineau. Poltergeist activity is widely reported at the Rifles Museum. Not the best place, perhaps, to have a poltergeist running around, with books flying from shelves, heavy footsteps echoing from empty rooms, and even the apparition of a woman seen by many members of the staff. What will you discover on your visit?